My name is Francis, and at 55 years old, I thought I had seen enough of life's curveballs to handle just about anything. But nothing, and I mean nothing, could have prepared me for what happened at my son Marcus's 28th birthday dinner last month. I had spent weeks planning for this special evening, carefully selecting the perfect gift, a vintage Omega watch from the 1960s that Marcus had admired years ago in an antique shop. I even splurged on a new dress and got my hair done at the salon for the first time in 2 years. I was so excited to celebrate my boy and finally have some beautiful family photos to hang on my living room wall. Before I dive into this story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Please hit that like button and subscribe to my channel because what happened next will absolutely shock you. Trust me, you won't believe how this birthday celebration took a turn that left everyone at the table completely speechless. To understand what happened that night, you need to know a little about my journey as a mother. I raised Marcus as a single parent from the time he was 3 years old. His father walked out on us when the going got tough, leaving me to figure out how to be both mother and father to a confused little boy who kept asking when Daddy was coming home. Those early years were the hardest of my life. I worked 2 jobs just to keep us afloat. During the day, I was a secretary at a small insurance office downtown, typing up policies and answering phones for 40 hours a week. At night, I waited tables at Rosie's Diner until closing time, sometimes not getting home until 2 in the morning. I'd collapse into bed exhausted, only to wake up 5 hours later to get Marcus ready for school. I gave up everything for that boy. I had been halfway through my nursing degree when his father left, but I had to drop out because I couldn't afford childcare and tuition at the same time. Dating was out of the question. I turned down every invitation, every setup my friends suggested, because every spare moment I had belonged to Marcus. He needed stability, and I was determined to give him that, even if it meant sacrificing my own dreams. Marcus was a bright kid, though. He excelled in school, played on the debate team, and earned a full scholarship to State University. Watching him graduate with honors in marketing was the proudest moment of my life. All those sleepless nights, all those missed opportunities, they all felt worth it when I saw him walk across that stage in his cap and gown. After college, Marcus landed a great job with a prestigious marketing firm in the city. He was making more money in his first year than I had ever made in any single year of my life. He moved into a nice apartment, started wearing expensive suits, and seemed to be living the American dream I had always wanted for him. 2 years ago, Marcus met Stephanie at a corporate networking event. She was beautiful, educated, and came from what Marcus called good money. Her father owned a chain of luxury car dealerships, and her mother was on the board of several charity organizations. When Marcus brought her home to meet me for the first time, I was overjoyed. Finally, my son had found someone special, and I might even gain the daughter I had always wished for. Stephanie was polite enough during that first meeting, complimenting my pot roast and asking appropriate questions about my work. But I noticed how her eyes wandered around my modest living room, taking in the second-hand furniture and the outdated wallpaper I couldn't afford to replace. She smiled when she spoke to me, but there was something cold behind her eyes, something that made me feel like I was being evaluated and found wanting. Still, I was determined to build a relationship with her. I started paying closer attention to how I dressed when we had family gatherings. I bought new clothes from department stores instead of thrift shops, practiced speaking more formally, and even took a few etiquette classes at the community center. I wanted to fit into their world, to be the kind of mother-in-law that Stephanie could be proud to introduce to her friends. Looking back now, I can see that the warning signs were there from the very beginning. I was just too hopeful, too eager to be accepted to recognize them for what they really were. The first red flag came during a family gathering at Stephanie's parents' house, about 6 months after Marcus and Stephanie got engaged. The Whitmore family lived in a sprawling colonial mansion in the most exclusive neighborhood in town. Their dining room table could seat 12 people comfortably, and every piece of furniture looked like it belonged in a museum. I arrived at exactly the time Marcus had told me, wearing my best dress and carrying a homemade apple pie. Mrs. Whitmore answered the door wearing a silk blouse that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She thanked me for the pie with a tight smile and immediately handed it off to their housekeeper as if my contribution was somehow contaminated. The dinner conversation revolved around topics I knew nothing about. They discussed their recent trip to Tuscany, their plans to buy a vacation home in the Hamptons, and the latest gossip from their country club. When I tried to contribute by mentioning a nice bed and breakfast Marcus and I had visited upstate when he was younger, the conversation simply moved on as if I hadn't spoken at all. I was seated at the far end of the table next to Stephanie's elderly uncle, who spent most of the evening complaining about his arthritis. Meanwhile, Marcus sat between Stephanie and her father, laughing at inside jokes and discussing business deals I couldn't understand. It was as if I was watching my son's life from the outside, no longer a central character, but merely a background player. The second incident happened at the wedding of one of Stephanie's college friends. It was a lavish affair at an exclusive country club with 5 courses and an open bar that served top-shelf liquor. I had bought a new dress for the occasion, something I thought was elegant and appropriate. But when we arrived at the reception, I realized I was severely underdressed compared to the other guests who wore designer gowns and jewelry that sparkled under the crystal chandeliers. Marcus and Stephanie were seated at the head table with the rest of the wedding party, while I was placed at table 9 all the way in the back corner of the ballroom. My table mates were pleasant enough, but I quickly realized they were all service providers: the photographer's assistant, the florist's delivery driver, and the caterer's mother. None of them were actual guests at the wedding. When I mentioned this to Marcus later, he brushed off my concerns, saying he thought I would be more comfortable sitting with people my own age who weren't caught up in all the social politics. But the most painful incident occurred just 3 months ago at Stephanie's birthday party. I had spent weeks working on a special gift for her, a beautiful cable-knit sweater in her favorite shade of blue. I had learned to knit specifically for this project, watching YouTube tutorials late into the night and practicing different stitches until my fingers ached. The sweater was perfect with intricate Celtic patterns along the neckline and cuffs. When Stephanie opened my gift, she held it up for everyone to see and thanked me politely. But I caught the look that passed between her and her mother, a barely concealed expression of disdain. Later, I overheard Stephanie telling one of her friends that she didn't understand why people thought homemade gifts were appropriate for adults. Marcus, my own son, actually apologized to her later for my thoughtless present, promising that next time he would help me choose something more suitable. That night, lying in bed, I felt a growing sense of isolation. The family I thought I was gaining was slowly but systematically pushing me out, and worst of all, Marcus seemed to be helping them do it. But I kept telling myself that things would get better, that once Stephanie got to know me better, she would see that I wasn't trying to compete with her or embarrass her family. I just wanted to love my son and be part of his happiness. Despite the growing tension, I was determined to make Marcus's birthday celebration perfect. This was my son's 28th birthday, a milestone that deserved recognition, and I wanted to show both him and Stephanie that I could be the kind of family member they would be proud to include in their circle. I started planning 6 weeks in advance, which for someone on my budget meant serious financial strategizing. The centerpiece of my plan was finding the perfect gift, something that would remind Marcus of our bond, while also impressing his new family with its thoughtfulness and value. I remembered a conversation we'd had 3 years earlier when we were browsing through an antique shop downtown. Marcus had stopped in front of a display case containing vintage watches and pointed to a 1962 Omega Seamaster with a deep blue face and silver band. He had admired its classic design and mentioned how his grandfather, my father, had worn a similar watch during his years as a naval officer. At the time, the watch cost $800, far beyond anything I could afford on a whim. But for his birthday, I was determined to make it happen. I started working extra shifts at the diner, picking up weekend doubles and staying late whenever possible. I cut every possible expense from my budget, buying generic groceries, skipping my usual small luxuries, and even canceling my cable subscription. For 6 months, every extra dollar went into what I privately called my Marcus Fund. Finding the exact watch proved more challenging than I had expected. I visited every antique shop, pawn store, and estate sale within a 50-mile radius. I learned more about vintage timepieces than I ever thought possible, studying the subtle differences between models and years. Finally, at an estate sale in the suburbs, I found a 1964 Omega Seamaster in pristine condition with the original leather band and even the vintage box. The asking price was $750, which represented nearly every penny I had saved. As I handed over the cash, my hands were literally shaking. This was more money than I had ever spent on a single item that wasn't a necessity. But seeing Marcus's face when he opened it would be worth every sacrifice. I also wanted to look my best for the celebration. Instead of trying to find something suitable in my closet, I decided to splurge on a new dress. I found a beautiful navy blue cocktail dress on sale at Macy's, something classic and elegant that I thought would photograph well. For the first time in almost 2 years, I made an appointment at a real salon instead of just trimming my own hair with kitchen scissors. The morning of the birthday dinner, I spent an hour getting ready, styling my newly cut hair and applying makeup with the same care I used to take when Marcus was young, and we would dress up for special occasions. I practiced conversations in the mirror, rehearsing interesting stories from my childhood and current events I had read about online. I was determined to contribute meaningfully to whatever discussions arose during dinner. I even stopped at the liquor store to buy a bottle of wine to bring to the restaurant. The clerk recommended a Bordeaux that cost $60, explaining that it would pair well with whatever French cuisine we might order. It was another significant expense, but I wanted to arrive with something that would show I understood and appreciated fine things. As I drove to the restaurant that evening, I felt a mixture of excitement and nervous energy that reminded me of the way I used to feel before Marcus's school plays or graduation ceremonies. This was my moment to prove that I belonged in his new life, that I could be an asset rather than an embarrassment to his growing success. I had even brought my good camera, hoping to capture some beautiful family portraits that I could frame and display in my living room. For years, my walls had been covered with photos of Marcus from childhood through college, but I had very few pictures of us together as adults. Tonight, I imagined would provide the perfect opportunity to create some new memories and document this important milestone in his life. The restaurant Marcus had chosen was called Le Bernardin, a French establishment downtown known for its sophisticated atmosphere and prices to match. As I pulled up to the valet stand, I felt slightly intimidated by the elegant facade and the well-dressed couples walking through the front entrance. But I reminded myself that my son was successful enough to afford this level of luxury, and I should be proud of how far he had come. Inside the restaurant was dimly lit with soft candlelight and decorated in warm earth tones. Classical music played quietly in the background, and the waitstaff moved with the practiced efficiency of people accustomed to serving very expensive meals. I followed the hostess to a private dining room in the back, where I could already hear laughter and conversation. When I entered the room, I immediately noticed that the guest list was smaller and more exclusive than I had expected. Marcus and Stephanie sat at the center of a long table surrounded by 3 other couples that I recognized as Stephanie's friends from previous social events. There was David and Amanda, both lawyers who worked at prestigious downtown firms. Next to them sat Richard and Patricia, who owned several successful restaurants in the city. At the far end of the table were Stephanie's parents, Robert and Helen Whitmore, looking as distinguished and intimidating as ever. What struck me immediately was that there were no guests from Marcus's side of the family or his old circle of friends. No college buddies, no co-workers from his current job. No one who had known him before he became part of Stephanie's world. It was as if his entire history before meeting her had been erased from this celebration. Marcus stood up when he saw me, giving me a quick hug that felt more obligatory than affectionate. His smile was bright, but somehow strained, and I noticed he glanced quickly at Stephanie before greeting me. He was wearing a charcoal gray suit that I didn't recognize, probably something new and expensive that Stephanie had helped him pick out. Stephanie remained seated, offering me a polite wave and a practiced smile. She looked stunning in a black cocktail dress that probably cost more than my monthly salary. Her blonde hair styled in perfect waves and her makeup applied with professional precision. When she said hello, her voice was warm enough, but her eyes were already scanning the room as if she was looking for someone more interesting to talk to. I was directed to the seat at the far end of the table, physically separated from Marcus and the main conversation by nearly 8 feet and 4 other people. From my position, I could barely hear what was being discussed, and participating in the dialogue would require raising my voice to an awkward level. The first course arrived shortly after I sat down, some sort of seafood appetizer with a French name I couldn't pronounce. As we ate, the conversation flowed around topics that excluded me almost entirely. They discussed recent business acquisitions, vacation plans to exotic destinations, and mutual friends I had never met. When Richard mentioned his plans to open a new restaurant in Miami, everyone became animated, offering suggestions and sharing stories about their own favorite spots in South Beach. I tried several times to contribute to the conversation, mentioning a small restaurant Marcus and I had enjoyed during a weekend trip to the mountains when he was in college. But my story seemed to fall flat, and after a few polite nods, the conversation moved on to more glamorous travel experiences. I felt like I was speaking a different language, one that didn't translate well into their world of luxury and privilege. When the wine arrived, Robert Whitmore took charge of the tasting ritual, swirling and sniffing with the confidence of someone who had performed this routine thousands of times. The bottle he had ordered cost more than I spent on groceries in a month, and when he offered to pour me a glass, I accepted gratefully, hoping the alcohol might help me relax and find my social footing. As the evening progressed, I found myself becoming increasingly invisible. Conversations happened around me and over me, but rarely included me. When someone occasionally remembered to direct a question my way, it was usually something generic about the weather or my health, the kind of small talk reserved for elderly relatives or distant acquaintances. The most painful moment came when Amanda asked Marcus about his childhood, clearly fishing for cute stories to share. Instead of mentioning our family traditions or the adventures we'd had together, Marcus talked about his high school achievements and college experiences, carefully editing out any reference to our modest background or the struggles we had faced as a single-parent family. He made his childhood sound privileged and easy, as if he had always lived in the kind of comfort he enjoyed now. As the meal progressed into the main course, the atmosphere became increasingly festive, but my own discomfort continued to grow. The wine had loosened everyone's tongues, and the stories being shared became more personal and animated. I found myself in the strange position of being present, but not included, like a silent observer watching someone else's family celebration. Then David suggested taking some photos to commemorate the occasion. The suggestion was met with immediate enthusiasm from everyone at the table, and suddenly, chairs were being pushed back and people were standing up, arranging themselves for pictures. This was exactly what I had been hoping for all evening, my chance to finally be part of a beautiful family moment that I could treasure forever. I stood up, automatically smoothing my navy dress and checking my hair in the reflection of the wine glass. I had been anticipating this moment all week, imagining how wonderful it would feel to stand next to Marcus with my arm around his shoulders, both of us smiling at the camera like the close-knit family we had always been. But as I moved toward the group, Stephanie placed a gentle hand on my arm, stopping me in my tracks. Her smile was sweet and seemingly concerned, but her words hit me like a physical blow. "Oh, Francis," she said in a voice that carried clearly across the now quiet dining room. "Maybe you should sit this one out. This is really more of a family photo, you know what I mean?" The words hung in the air like poison gas. I stood there frozen, trying to process what had just been said to me. family photo. But I was Marcus's family. I was his mother, the person who had given birth to him, raised him, sacrificed everything for his success. If I wasn't family, then who was? I looked around the table, expecting someone to correct this obvious misunderstanding, to laugh at the absurdity of excluding a mother from her own son's birthday photos. But instead, I saw nods of agreement and comfortable acceptance of Stephanie's decision. Robert and Helen Whitmore looked relieved, as if they had been hoping someone would address this awkward situation. David and Amanda exchanged a quick glance that suggested they thought this was perfectly reasonable. And Marcus, my beloved son, the boy I had worked 2 jobs to support, said absolutely nothing. He didn't protest, didn't correct his wife, didn't even look uncomfortable. He just stood there with a neutral expression, as if his mother's exclusion from family photos was the most natural thing in the world. I don't understand, I managed to say, my voice sounding small and confused even to my own ears. It's Marcus's birthday. I'm his mother. Stephanie's expression remained patient but firm, the way someone might speak to a confused child. Of course you're his mother, Francis. But this is really about our generation, our social circle. You understand, right? We want photos that we can share with our friends and hang in our home. The implication was crystal clear. I was not someone they wanted to share with their friends or display in their home. I was an embarrassment, a reminder of Marcus's humble origins that needed to be hidden away like an outdated piece of furniture. I sat back down heavily, my legs suddenly unsteady. Around me, the photo session continued as if nothing had happened. They arranged themselves in different configurations, laughing and posing, completely comfortable with my exile from their celebration. Stephanie handed me her phone at one point, asking if I could take a few shots of the group, effectively transforming me from family member to hired photographer. As I held her expensive phone and watched my son smile brilliantly for pictures that would never include his mother, I felt something fundamental shift inside my chest. The hurt and confusion were still there, but underneath them, a new emotion was building: anger. Pure, righteous anger at the way I was being treated, and at my son's complicity in my humiliation. For the next 30 minutes, I sat in my assigned seat watching as they took dozens of photos in every possible combination. Pictures of Marcus and Stephanie alone, pictures with Stephanie's parents, pictures with their friends, pictures of just the women, pictures of just the men. Every grouping imaginable, except for the one that should have mattered most, a mother with her son on his birthday. Each camera click felt like another small wound, another confirmation that I had somehow become persona non grata in my own son's life. I watched Marcus laugh and pose his arm around his wife, his smile never faltering, never once glancing in my direction with concern or apology. This was the same boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, who used to make me Mother's Day cards with crayons and construction paper, who used to tell people proudly that his mom was his best friend. As I sat there in my expensive dress, holding my untouched wine glass, memories began flooding back with startling clarity. I remembered working double shifts at the diner when Marcus was 12, coming home exhausted at 2 a.m. to find him asleep at the kitchen table, having waited up to show me his spelling test grade of 100%. I remembered selling my engagement ring, the only valuable thing his father had left me with, to pay for Marcus's class trip to Washington, D.C. because I couldn't bear to see him be the only kid who couldn't afford to go. I remembered countless nights when he was sick, holding a cool washcloth to his fevered forehead and singing him to sleep. I remembered teaching him to drive in my beat-up Honda, patiently enduring his jerky stops and starts in empty parking lots. I remembered the pride in his voice when he called to tell me about his first job offer, how he had said, "Mom, we did it. We really did it." But apparently, we hadn't done anything together. According to this narrative being constructed around his birthday table, Marcus had achieved his success independently, through his own merit and the guidance of his new family. I was being written out of his story as efficiently as someone erasing pencil marks from paper. The breaking point came when Patricia suggested they take one more group shot, and Stephanie directed everyone to squeeze in closer together. As they rearranged themselves, laughing and chattering, Robert Whitmore looked directly at me and said, "Francis, would you mind stepping over there by the window so we can get the lighting right?" It wasn't a request. It was an instruction. "Move away from us. Stand over there where you belong, separate from the real family, while we document our happiness without you." That was the moment when something inside me snapped. Not broke exactly, but snapped into place like a bone setting after being fractured. I had spent 2 years trying to shrink myself to become acceptable to these people, to earn my place in my own son's life. I had apologized for gifts that came from my heart, for clothes that represented my best efforts, for stories that revealed my working-class background. I had made myself smaller and smaller, hoping that eventually I would become small enough to be welcomed into their perfect world. But sitting there banished to the window like an unwanted piece of furniture, I realized that no amount of shrinking would ever be enough. They didn't want me to become acceptable. They wanted me to disappear entirely. And my son, the person I loved most in the world, was not only allowing this to happen, but actively participating in it. I stood up from my chair, my movement so sudden and decisive that several people stopped talking and looked in my direction. I could feel my heart beating steadily, but instead of the rapid, panicky rhythm I expected, it was slow and strong and determined. I had made a decision, and for the first time in months, maybe years, I felt completely certain about what I needed to do. "Excuse me," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the dining room. "I need to step out for a moment." I walked out of the private dining room with measured steps, my back straight and my chin up. In the main restaurant, I could hear the normal sounds of dinner service, the gentle clatter of silverware against china, the murmur of conversation, the discreet footsteps of waitstaff. Everything seemed surreal, as if I was moving through a dream, where ordinary life continued while my own world was being fundamentally restructured. I approached the hostess station, where a young woman with kind eyes greeted me with a professional smile. "Is everything all right with your dining experience this evening?" "Actually, I need to speak with the manager about our private dining room," I said calmly. "There's been a change in the payment arrangements." A few minutes later, I found myself seated in the manager's office writing a check for the entire evening's bill. The amount was staggering, nearly $1,500 for 8 people, including wine appetizers, multiple courses, and gratuity. It represented more money than I typically spent in 2 months' money that I would normally save for emergencies or unexpected expenses. But as I signed my name at the bottom of the check, I felt no regret, only a strange sense of liberation. This money wasn't buying dinner. It was buying my dignity back. It was purchasing the right to leave on my own terms, to make my own statement about what I was worth and how I expected to be treated. The manager, a distinguished gentleman in his 50s, processed the payment with professional discretion, though I could see curiosity in his eyes. "Will there be anything else you need from us this evening, Mrs. Thompson?" "No," I said, standing up and smoothing my dress. "Everything has been perfect. Please make sure the waitstaff knows that gratuity has been included." As I walked back toward the private dining room, I could hear the sounds of continued celebration. They were still taking photos, still laughing, still enjoying Marcus's birthday, as if nothing had happened. And in their minds, probably nothing had. My absence was likely barely noted, just a relief that the awkward element had removed herself from their perfect evening. But when I stepped back into the room, I was no longer the same woman who had left 10 minutes earlier. I was no longer someone seeking approval or acceptance. I was no longer willing to make myself invisible for the comfort of others. I stood in the doorway for a moment, observing the scene with new eyes, seeing clearly for the first time how completely I had been marginalized in my own son's life. Marcus was showing off his new watch, the Omega I had sacrificed so much to buy for him, letting his friends examine it and compliment his excellent taste. Stephanie was recounting some amusing story that had everyone laughing, her hand resting possessively on Marcus's arm. The Whitmores were discussing their upcoming cruise to the Mediterranean, planning shore excursions to places I had only seen in magazines. None of them noticed my return. I might as well have been a ghost, invisible and insubstantial, haunting the periphery of their celebration. But that was about to change. I walked to my place at the table and stood behind my chair, not sitting down. My movement was deliberate enough that one by one the conversations died away, and all eyes turned toward me. In the sudden quiet, I could hear my own heartbeat steady and strong, and somewhere in the distance, the soft jazz music that played throughout the restaurant. "I have an announcement to make," I said, my voice calm and clear. The silence that followed my words was complete and immediate. 8 pairs of eyes focused on me with varying degrees of curiosity, confusion, and mild concern. Marcus lowered the wrist, wearing his new watch, and tilted his head slightly the way he used to do as a child when he was trying to understand something unexpected. "I've just paid the bill for tonight's dinner." I continued, letting my gaze move slowly around the table, meeting each person's eyes before moving to the next. "All of it. The food, the wine, everything. Consider it my birthday gift to everyone here." The announcement created a small ripple of confusion. Robert Whitmore cleared his throat and began to protest that such generosity wasn't necessary, while Patricia murmured something about how thoughtful that was. But I raised my hand, gently signaling that I wasn't finished speaking. "Before I leave," I said, pulling out my phone, "I'd like to take a photograph of my own." I held up the device and carefully framed the shot, capturing the entire table with all its elegant place settings, the birthday cake that had just been brought out, and most importantly, all the people who had spent the evening, making it clear that I didn't belong among them. The camera clicked once, a sharp sound, in the quiet room. "This," I said, lowering the phone and looking directly at Marcus, "will be my souvenir of the birthday dinner where I wasn't allowed to appear in family photos." Marcus's face went pale, and for the first time all evening, he looked genuinely uncomfortable. "Mom," he started to say, but I held up my hand again. 28 years ago today, I gave birth to a beautiful baby boy." I continued, my voice remaining steady despite the magnitude of what I was saying. "I was 27 years old, alone and scared, but I was determined to give that baby the best life I possibly could." I could see Stephanie shifting uncomfortably in her seat, clearly wanting this moment to end, but I was far from finished. For the next 25 years, that boy was the center of my universe. I worked multiple jobs to keep him fed and clothed and educated. I gave up my own dreams, my own opportunities, my own chance at love, because he needed me to be strong and present and devoted. I never missed a school play, a baseball game, or a parent-teacher conference. When he was sick, I stayed up all night to make sure his fever broke. When he was sad, I held him until he felt better. When he succeeded, I cheered louder than anyone else in the room. Marcus was staring at his hands now, unable to meet my gaze, while the rest of the table sat frozen in mortified silence. I thought I was raising a son who would grow up to be a man of character and loyalty, someone who would remember where he came from and who helped him get there, someone who would be proud to include his mother in his life, not ashamed of her. I paused, looking around the table one more time at these people who had spent months making me feel inadequate and unwelcome. But tonight, I realized that the boy I raised no longer exists. In his place sits a stranger who is embarrassed by his own mother, who allows his wife and her family to treat me like hired help, who stands by silently while I'm excluded from his birthday celebration because I don't fit the image of the family he wants to project. My voice never wavered, never rose to anger, or broke with emotion. I felt strangely detached, as if I was narrating someone else's story. "So this is my gift to all of you," I said, picking up my purse and the coat I had draped over my chair. "You no longer have to worry about including me in your perfect life, Marcus. You're free to pretend that you achieved everything on your own, that you sprang fully formed into the world without any help from someone who wasn't good enough for your new family. I turned toward the door, then looked back over my shoulder for one final statement. Happy birthday, son. I hope it was everything you wanted it to be. The silence behind me was deafening as I walked out of the private dining room through the elegant restaurant and into the cool night air. I handed my valet ticket to the young man at the stand and waited calmly for my car, breathing deeply and feeling lighter than I had in months. As I drove home through the quiet streets, I didn't cry. I didn't rage or curse or feel sorry for myself. Instead, I felt a profound sense of peace, the kind that comes from finally standing up for yourself after years of accepting less than you deserve. I had spent so long trying to earn my place in Marcus's new life that I had forgotten my own worth, my own dignity, my own right to be treated with respect and love. The next few weeks brought the predictable attempts at reconciliation. Marcus called repeatedly, leaving voicemails that ranged from angry to pleading to confused. He showed up at my apartment twice, but I didn't answer the door. Stephanie sent a carefully worded email expressing regret for any misunderstanding and inviting me to lunch to work things out. But there was nothing to work out. The damage wasn't in what they had done to me that night. It was in what they had revealed about how they truly saw me. I wasn't a beloved mother who deserved respect and inclusion. I was an obligation, an embarrassment, a reminder of a past they wanted to forget. The hardest part wasn't losing Marcus, though that pain was real and deep. The hardest part was accepting that I had lost him long before that birthday dinner. I had been so focused on trying to maintain a relationship with someone who no longer existed that I had failed to notice when he stopped being my son and became a stranger who happened to share my DNA. But in letting go of that relationship, I found something unexpected myself. For the first time in years, I started making decisions based on what I wanted, what made me happy, what honored my own values and dreams. I enrolled in those nursing classes I had abandoned decades earlier. I started dating again, meeting people who appreciated my kindness and strength rather than seeing them as character flaws. I learned that sometimes the greatest act of love is walking away from people who don't value your presence in their lives. That self-respect isn't selfish, it's essential, and that the opinions of people who don't truly know or appreciate you are worthless, even when those people happen to be family. 6 months later, I graduated from nursing school with honors and started working at a local hospital. My coworkers became my new family people who valued my experience, respected my dedication, and never made me feel like I had to apologize for who I was or where I came from. Sometimes I wonder what Marcus tells people when they ask about his mother. Does he say, I died, that we're estranged, that I was never really part of his life? It doesn't matter anymore. The truth is that the son I raised, the boy I loved with every fiber of my being, did die that night at Le Bernardin. And while I mourned that loss, I also celebrated my own rebirth. The most important lesson I learned from that terrible birthday dinner is this: your worth is not determined by whether other people recognize it. You don't need anyone's permission to value yourself, to demand respect, to walk away from situations that diminish your spirit. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do is to stop trying to force yourself into spaces where you're not wanted, and start creating your own space where you're celebrated exactly as you are. I still have that photo I took at Marcus's birthday dinner, the one showing all those people who thought they were better than me. Sometimes I look at it and remember how small and unwanted I felt that night. But mostly, I look at it and feel proud of the woman who finally found her courage, who finally said, enough, who finally chose herself. That woman deserved so much better than what she was accepting, and thankfully, she finally realized it before it was too late. What would you have done in my situation? Have you ever had to walk away from toxic family members, even when it broke your heart? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and share it with someone who might need to hear that they deserve better. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories about finding strength in difficult situations. Remember, you are worthy of love and respect, and anyone who makes you feel otherwise doesn't deserve a place in your life. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it gives you the courage to value yourself the way you deserve to be valued.